living fully alive in every way. You're listening to Relationship Prescriptions with Dr. Carol.
Are you a happily married man or woman? Hi there, I'm Dr. Carol, and you are listening to Relationship Prescriptions. I hear from men and women every day who are not happily married. I have come to believe that there is nothing, at least nothing earthly, that makes a bigger impact on your well-being, the quality of your life, than the health or lack thereof of your closest personal relationships. If you're married, that's your relationship with your spouse. Marriage is messy. Marriage is God's idea, but that means a union of two sinners. You're broken, your spouse is broken, and those two sinners coming together, it is a setup for a mess. But it also gives God an amazing opportunity to do His work. Now, there is a narrative that some in the Christian church have, come to believe or talked about. And I think intellectually, this is not the whole story, but it goes something like this. Boy meets girl, they fall in love, they get married, and happily ever after. They live happily ever after. But if you're married, that that's not the case, that marriage is messy. Being honest about those messinesses and finding the way through, finding the solutions to the challenges, that's what learning to love well is all about. My guest on the program today, Joshua Rogers, is a husband, a father of three, an attorney, a writer. His book, Confessions of a Happily Married Man, Finding God in the Messiness of Marriage, is incredibly vulnerable. Joshua and his wife, Raquel, go there. They tell stories about their own marriage and what God has brought them through. I don't want to spoil any of the fun, but just get ready for a very real and authentic conversation about what real marriage is like and how God can deal with you if you bring the real stuff to Him. We talk about power, we talk about conflict, we talk about family of origin, we talk about sex. Yes, we're going there. So enjoy this conversation with my guest, Joshua Rogers. Well, Joshua Rogers, I am really grateful and excited to have this conversation today about something that I hear from husbands and wives all the time, every day. When your closest personal relationships are going well, life is good. When they are not, life is not going well at all. I'm not sure there's anything that impacts a person's well-being much more than your closest personal relationships. And if you're married, that's your spouse. And thank you for being here today to talk about this.
It's my pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me on the show.
Yeah. Just for people who may not be familiar with you, let me just ask you to give the big picture of how you came to talk about this, who you are, your marriage, just so we have a little context.
Okay. Well, I am a husband, a father, an attorney, and a writer. And I have been writing for several years. I was just doing my little blog there for a while, and then I kind of got discovered, if you will, by a couple of people. And I started writing at bigger outlets, and then I had the opportunity to write a book. It's called Confessions of a Happily Married Man, Finding God in the Messiness of Marriage. And that is a book that really addresses some of the street sense that we all need in marriage, but I do it in the context of my own marriage with my wife, Raquel, and me, because so often in books, including Christian books, what we get is either stories about composites. I knew a woman named Lucy who I canceled, or you have something about my wife and I 25 years ago, but my wife and I are willing to tell stories from here and now and not just give some advice that doesn't have meat to it through our story.
in looking at the messiness of marriage that you share, and I just want to say, Confessions of a Happily Married Man, it is real. Sometimes it's funny, sometimes it's sobering. It is just it's great in showing what the messiness of marriage is and how God can impact that. I want to ask you about a few of the big pieces here that I think many couples struggle with. Let me ask you first about the backstories. Everybody comes to marriage thinking it's brand new and you're going to start and everything's going to be perfect and beautiful, happily ever after. But your backstory plays into that, and it's not always so easy. So what about the backstory?
Well, for Raquel and me, we both came to marriage from broken families. In my case, my parents divorced when I was 13, but my parents had split up, or my father had actually left us 4 times before they ultimately split up. And as a kid, I really idealized my parents' marriage despite all of the trauma that was going on, because there was a lot of beautiful stuff. My dad would look at my mom and sing to her, and he would kiss her in front of us, and we'd be like, "Ooh, Dad."
No.
But at the same time, I heard fights that I shouldn't hear. And I heard accusations and words said behind their backs. And so for me, it was really like it set me up for fear. And it was hard to even want to be married for a while. But over time, I eventually had hope in marriage. And I brought to our marriage some of that baggage. But ultimately, in my case, I made the decision I'm not going to revisit that. And I have a wife who, despite growing up in her own home with a marriage that was struggling, she also came to it with the same commitment. And it's 13 years later, and we still very much like each other.
Well, that is awesome, because when there's conflict, some married people end up not liking each other, and dealing with the backstories is part of that. What was it like for you to come to realize that the marriage that you had watched growing up closest to you impacted your own marriage or your ability to relate, however you want to say that?
Well, I mean, the thing is, as I've gotten older, I've put my parents' marriage in perspective. I mean, it eventually at 17 years fell apart, but there was a lot of good in it. There is something to be said for having a dad who'll kiss your mom in front of you. There's something to be said for a dad who'll call, your mom the queen or whatever. But so I think that's one of the big things, is to look back and realize there have been good things that came from it. And also, I think one thing that was helpful is having parents who didn't bash each other. And they both supported my marriage. And not only that, but encouraged me. Even my mom sitting down and saying, "Hey, look, this kind of stuff that happened in your dad and my marriage, it's going to stop." I remember her saying, "It stops here, Joshua." So I think that was part of it, is actually out of the brokenness in my parents' own broken marriage, there could even be healing, and watching the good things that I grew up with, and even some of the good things that happened afterwards. And even when my dad died, in particular, the way my mom talked about him and the way that she has many times spoken about him with kindness, about him as a husband. And that means everything. And that it's very restorative. And it really helps you take a deep breath and say, you know what, just because you're having struggles doesn't mean everything's bad,
Yeah, that's a great perspective. In your own marriage, you tell some great stories. You tell the baby monitor story in your book, Confessions of a Happily Married Man, and others. And one of the things that impressed me is that this Christian illusion that so many young people, I think, have, is that if we both are believers, if we both love Jesus and we love each other, this should just work. It should be easy. And you discovered it's not that case in probably all marriages. Maybe share a vignette or two that just how you came to see that, yeah, we've got some things to learn, even though we both love Jesus and love each other.
Well, the thing was, we met on May 12th, 2007, and we got engaged 4 months later. I mean, we said hello, and 4 months later, she said yes. So, but during that 4 months, I mean, we were just tiptoeing through the tulips. I mean, it was perfect. We had one disagreement. And so that night that we got engaged, it was glorious. It was amazing. And the next morning we sat down to talk about wedding details, and everything came apart. It became like quasi war at that point for 5 months up into the wedding. And the thing that I didn't appreciate at the time, but I look back on, is that it was negotiation. We had not negotiated anything up to that point. So when it came time to negotiate, we discovered, oh, wait, I have different ideas of how things should be done. And not only that, we're both strong personalities. Now, there's some marriages where they're like, well, we don't have conflict, which I think might be a little scary because somebody might be getting bulldozed.
Yeah.
In our marriage, that wasn't the case. The good thing was we were talking everything out, and there was forgiveness. We butt heads, talk it out, fight it out, and then we'd move on. So that was one of the things. But at our wedding, it occurred to me that I was standing there, about to kiss my bride, and I was like, wow, God's presence is here. We're never going to fight again. I really feel like God's showing me that. I really believed it. And we didn't for 6 days.
6 days. Yeah, 6 days.
We made it 6 days into the honeymoon. I mean, we were so distracted. It's the honeymoon. And then we have a fight about the dumbest thing. And as it turns out, we have another fight, and it turned out that we were going to spend years, and we still butt heads over stupid stuff, but we were going to spend years negotiating. And being willing to keep negotiating and forgiving at the same time is where you really discover love.
That sounds a lot like, power and control dynamics. One of the things I see a lot in couples is that they don't know how to negotiate. They don't want to, nobody wants to give up control. And in your book, you talk about having to learn that now that you're married, now that the two of you are one, you're both sinners. So it's not going to be perfect. And that having to learn to work through that you can't control everything. And both of you have to learn that's not easy.
Well, it's not. And I think that part of the thing is, I did an integrity interview is what it's called at one point that really helped me realize how domineering I was. I was in this small group where there were two other guys, and one of the guys suggested this integrity interview that he'd gotten the idea from the book Integrity by Henry Cloud. Mm-hmm. And the idea is you take like 10 questions, probably about 6 of them that elicit somewhat negative responses, and ask somebody, like, honestly, what's it like to live on the other end of my personality? So I'm in this small group, and I said, well, I would do it, but, I definitely need somebody who's not so warm and fuzzy as you, Pat, because you can never come up with anything to answer this question that says, what do you find unpleasant about my life? And he said, oh, no, I can think of something unpleasant about your life. And I said, really? Well, tell me. He said, you sure you want me to say this right here? I said, go ahead. He said, the way you talk to Raquel in public really embarrasses me sometimes.
Ooh,
and
ouch.
I was so taken aback because I thought she was the embarrassing one. She was the one who was always getting on to me. She was always one who was correcting me. So I said, okay, I'll do this. And I did an integrity interview with 5 different people, asked the same questions. And the thing that was so hard was when I talked to Raquel, which it was first, I was kind of inoculated to, what she was saying. You can't defend yourself during these interviews. And there's a whole guide in the book as to how to do it. But I was listening to her. I'm like, yes, I've heard this before. But the thing that killed me was the next 4 people, probably about 80% of what they said overlapped with what she said. And it was a painful recognition that actually Raquel, even though her delivery wasn't always good, and she can confirm that, the fact was she was speaking into some truth that I really didn't want to hear and had not seen up until that point in my life. And a lot of what it was me basically trying to control and get my way And it had to end. It had to change. And so that was a point that was probably one of the most important turning points in my marriage.
Mm. Thanks for sharing that. Probably 95% of the married people who contact me, it's something about how can I get my spouse to change? And you're turning that completely around. It's what about me? I can't change the other person anyway. But looking at what it is about you, even if the other person does need to change, they do. But you focus on what you can control. Wow. That can be both sobering and frankly empowering.
Well, Raquel, actually, I am honored to say that she wrote the last chapter of the book. And she does confess, she's got her own stuff and that she can be very resistant to love, actually, is where she puts her finger on it. But the way that she's understood this kind of stuff, and one of the ways that we recognize this stuff, there's actually a spiritual discipline. It's a nice little Latin word called examine, but basically it's self-examination before the Lord. And again, there's a guide for doing this as well. But Raquel talks about pausing at the end of your day and asking, okay, God, let's go through today like a movie and let's see, where were you in that? Where was I receiving your love? Where was I resisting your love? How was I interacting with others? And of course, this is not, again, sitting down and just doing this on your own. It's prayerful. And essentially, that's what I did in writing this book, is not just giving the wisdom that the Lord's given me since I got married, but it was really like a decade-long examine of my marriage. Mm-hmm. And even writing the book, led me to, at one point, go to Raquel. And I just said, I'm so sorry. I am so sorry. I did not realize how many times I've embarrassed you by not having discretion with what I've said. That was something that came to me. Mm. And she started to cry. and she's not one to cry either, but it hit her so hard. But the reason I did that, or was able to see it, was because I stopped and examined it before the Lord. You don't have to write a book. You don't have to do a decade. But even if you just do an examine of one big fight you and your wife had, it can make all the difference in the world, because you can invite the Lord to speak into that circumstance.
That examine discipline, that has been a foundation in the Christian church for centuries. And I think in today's body of Christ, we don't talk about that enough. I really appreciate you talking about that in relation to marriage that can be challenging, so valuable. There's a chapter in your book, Confessions of a Happily Married Man, Naked and Ashamed.
Uh-oh.
Yes.
What? Wait, Carol, I don't remember that chapter. Can you remind me what that was about?
A play on the Genesis verse, the man and his wife were naked and unashamed. Well, right. Naked and ashamed. Oh my goodness. Talk about intimacy. And yes, that includes sex in marriage. And yes, we can say that on this podcast, but it's about more than only sex. You talk about having to learn some things about intimacy, and just unpack that for a minute.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, one thing I will say is that I think that just like people idealize sex sometimes, I found that people tried to talk it down. Like, okay, don't expect it's not going to be that great. It's going to last for 2 minutes. It's like, you know what? It might actually be wonderful. And Tim Keller talks about in his book, The Meaning of Marriage, it can take work, but it can really end up being good stuff. So I want to first of all say that one thing I discovered was sex was great. I really liked it, of course, but we enjoyed it. It was a time to have fun together. So I think one thing that I discovered was, honestly, this chapter of the book was hard to write. And I will tell you why, is because it would be easy for me to write and tell you about what works about our sex life. For example, we don't look at porn. I don't look at movies that have nudity in them. I can't deal with it. I mean, I don't even want to go there. I am very careful about how I interact with, other women. We make sure and go to bed at the same time. It increases the chances of being there with your clothes off and being like, well, we're here. But if I, there was the temptation to just write that chapter, but there was more to our sex life. And it was the most intimate part that I thought, am I going to do this? Am I really going to do this?
Mm-hmm.
And the part that I'm talking about was when we were on our honeymoon, we were in Mexico and we were at this pharmacy, I don't know, picking up gum or whatever. And there was this guy, looked like he was about 50. He was in like dad shorts, a little bit overweight with his wife. And he was trying to speak quietly. He was like, do you have any Viagra? And the man was loudly saying, we don't have anything but Viagra, 3 pills of Viagra. We've got 3. And he was like, well, how much is it? It's $30. The Viagra is $30. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I feel so bad for this guy. And there's this like moment of truth. And the guy looks at his wife, shrugged his shoulders, and they walk away.
Wow.
And it broke my heart. And I prayed like in my own mind, God, never let that be me. But in like the 9th year of our marriage, I was working like obscene hours. I was trying to be a good dad and a good father. I was also doing a medical treatment, experimental medical treatment. And I was under so much stress. And every day in my mind, I just felt like a loser. I felt like a failure at that time. And one night, Raquel and I were getting started and boom, it was over. Like, I'm like, wait, whoa, what just happened?
Yeah.
And it immediately devastated me. So much of my identity was built up into, hey, we have great sex, so I'm the man. And especially a guy, growing up and being made fun of with the kids at school. This was like something that really made me feel more masculine. And then all of a sudden it looked like it went up in smoke. Now, I think a lot of healthy men could be like, well, crud, and just move on. Nope, not for me. This became like a traumatic area in my life. And people toss around the word traumatic, but I'm talking about, I would start thinking about, okay, what about tonight? And my hands start shaking because of the horror of what if this doesn't work? And I remember, Raquel, when that would happen, which it became like it was again and again and again, most of the time, almost all the time, this is what was happening. I would lie there in bed, like gritting my teeth with tears running down my face. And I would just hate myself. And Raquel would correct me. She'd said, Joshua, this is not who you are. This is not who you are. This doesn't define you. You're on a journey with God. I'm like, I would tell her, I just want to go back. And she's like, no, you don't, because God's taking you somewhere better. Raquel never once, not one time over a many month stretch, did she ever critique me or say, what's wrong with me? Am I not beautiful enough? Why isn't it working? Stop. Nothing. All she did was encourage me. And I would say, the thing that I would say is, oh, I'm sorry, Raquel. And she'd say, stop. Don't apologize to me. That is coming from an unhealthy place of guilt. You better watch what you're saying to yourself. And I can tell you that those months of struggle, those were the most intimate times of our sex life, because that was the point where I found out I truly, truly was loved in that moment of sexuality, as much as it wasn't as wonderful and fun as it had started in the beginning.
That just grips at my heart to hear you share that story. And I pray that both husbands and wives who are listening, take that to heart. For wives to understand how the sexual connection and sexual performance, what that says to a man about his own soul, and how their response can either lift up or wither their husband. And also to the husbands, that as important as sex is, and God made it important, it was his idea, as important as it is not the entire defining part of you. That is powerful, Joshua. That's powerful.
Yeah. The thing is about that is I think Satan wants to shame us. Carol, if it had not been for Raquel's graciousness, I think I would have stopped wanting to even try. If she would have in any way, even a hint of humiliated me and said, my gosh, not again. anything like that, I would have wanted to quit. But I was drawn to grace, and that grace of Raquel saying, Joshua, she would say, I'm a very satisfied woman. I'm very satisfied. And so I think that what we were essentially doing is I was coming back on a journey with her actually manifesting the love of Jesus to the Garden of Eden, where I could be naked and unashamed. Instead of proving myself again, can I finally get back to that? Because then I'll be a man again. But I think what it did is it helped me be a husband in the bed instead of someone who was trying to prove himself.
Yeah. Another thing I hear is that the sexual connection, the sexual intimacy between you and Raquel is not only about physical, that the spiritual, the emotional, just the relational connection between you, it's very connected. And that if those other aspects of your relationship had not been there to support, the physical aspects wouldn't have survived that challenge. And I'm sure that's vice versa, that they are very connected. It's about more than only the biology.
Yeah, actually, I do want to say this. I don't want to write off, the early years as just being shallow. They weren't shallow. There was a depth to it. I remember early on, just, as a being honest, but you're having sex and I'm like, oh my gosh, like, this is like some kind of sci-fi thing. Like, we're one. Like, we're literally like, for this temporary moment, we have one body here. Which that to me was like kind of so amazing and such a picture of like, oh God, this is what marriage is about. And I remember Raquel, like, one time she said, all you want is sex. And that was the only time, because I looked at her and I was like, that's not true. It's never true. I mean, we were being so honest here. I was like, look, anybody can get an orgasm anyway, but I don't want that. I want you.
Yeah.
And she never said it again.
Wow. Thanks for being honest about those things, Joshua, because I know there are husbands and wives listening who have said those things to each other, who have wrestled with those very issues. You said something in an interview that I heard, like, you cannot experience intimacy with each other unless you are totally open with yourself and with God, that intimacy between you and your spouse, you have to let the walls down. My paraphrase. Talk about that for a second.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, I think people don't know themselves very well. I really don't. And that's the reason why something like Examine can be so intimidating. That's why that integrity interview was so terrifying, because I was getting to know me. I think people don't know themselves very well. And you don't know yourself really well until you bring that person before God and really ask questions like, God, who am I? What am I really like? Like, how much of what I think in my head is really true? The more you get to know yourself, you can bring that person to your spouse. And you can recognize like who the two of you are as a couple. But if you're not willing to be intimate with God and be frank with yourself, look in the mirror and not run away, then you're not going to be able to present the real you to your spouse. And you will get so frustrated that they're not interacting with who you think you are.
If you're false, you are always going to be disappointed that they don't really see you. That sense that I'm married, but my spouse doesn't know me. Well, if you don't give them opportunity to know you, they can't, which means you have to take the courage to know yourself before God. That's what I hear you saying.
Absolutely. That's right. And I mean, the thing that Raquel talks a lot about is just the false self. There's a whole realm of literature on the false self. And there's just this part of ourselves that we think we are, we want to be, the self-justifier, the one who lies to ourselves and makes ourselves believe things about ourselves that aren't true, but they make ourselves feel good because then we don't have to deal with the real me. If you will deal with that, then I think what God can do is actually at the same time as you come before him, show him the beautiful self. And that you can offer to your spouse instead of pretending. Because when you're pretending, I think deep down inside, you are, and you have to keep people at a distance or otherwise they see who you really are.
Mm. I'm going to step out here, Joshua, and say, I think your next book should be Dealing with the Real Me. There are husbands and wives listening who do not feel like they are a happily married man or woman. Is there anything you'd like to say? Maybe some encouragement or challenge, or what would you say to somebody who's married but is not experiencing that connection and all? How would you encourage or challenge them?
I think that what I would encourage you to do, look, first of all, I want to say, I did not say I'm a perfectly married man. The subtitle is Finding God in the Messiness of Marriage. I have
messy. Yes.
Yes.
I just want to pause and second that. Marriage is a messy business.
It's a very messy business, especially when you bring in other people. We've got 3 kids, and then it gets more complicated, especially as they get older. But I want to say that, first of all, nobody's saying you got to have a perfect marriage. But I think that what I would suggest, if you're in a marriage where you're like, oh my goodness, my husband, he just doesn't get it. I try, I want to connect with him and he won't. Or the man says, my spouse, my wife, she is so frustrating. She wants me to feel things that I don't feel. What I would say is this: go back to like the description I had of my sex life. You just be patient. Don't put them down. Look at them and know that they're on a journey with God. Trust that. My whole sex life, it didn't come back together overnight. It took a long time because I was broken, because something down deep inside was shaken. And it was something more than I even understood. And I think when you've got your spouse that is just continuing to be so frustrating, you can either say, God, what is wrong with you? I've tried so many times, but it doesn't get you anywhere. But if instead you can look at your spouse and say, you know what? He's on a journey. She's on a journey. And even to focus on all the good stuff. And like my wife said, you know what? I'm a happy man. I'm a happy woman. That might not be true in some cases, but you can at least be a believing man or a believing woman that God's big enough not to make your spouse in your image the person you want them to be, but to take them on a journey to who he wants them to be.
Very encouraging. Because God is taking both you and your spouse on a journey. And as he does, the two of you can come closer together. Thank you, Jonathan, for Joshua, for being real and honest. How can people find you and mention your book?
You can, look up the book on Amazon or any other website, Confessions of a Happily Married Man. You can also find my writing and anything else I've done, interviews at joshuarogers.com. That's ROGERS. And look me up on Twitter and Facebook at Mr. Joshua Rogers, ROGERS.
We will definitely have those links in the show notes for this episode as well. Joshua, again, a big thank you. Blessings to you, to your wife, to your family, your marriage, your ministry, what God is speaking and doing in other marriages because of you. It's been a great pleasure to have you on the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
What a gift. What a gift to hear Joshua be that authentic in sharing his own vulnerability, even about their own sex life and what that meant to his soul, and also to give the encouragement that it was not the end, that he got through it, that they got through it as a couple. I pray that is encouraging to you, whether sex life is your particular challenge or whether it's something else. Just the hope that marriage is messy, but there's hope and you can find God in the middle of the messiness. Joshua's book, Confessions of a Happily Married Man, Finding God in the Messiness of Marriage. I'd encourage you to get that. Find the link in the show notes. Connect with Joshua. We'll make sure the links are available. If your marriage is messy, you will find hope and encouragement here. Let me also encourage you that if your marriage is messy, don't stew in it alone. There are others in the body of Christ and in general, there are other people who are experiencing the same kind of challenges that you are. That's what led Joshua to and his wife Raquel to share these stories that other people need to hear that encouragement, and you sharing your story can encourage them, and also you can gain insight from others that have experienced similar challenges. One of the loneliest places is to feel like you're the only one who is experiencing a certain problem, and you're not. That kind of terminal uniqueness is a lie. Yes, other people are experiencing similar challenges to you. Reaching out and connecting with them can make such a difference. If your sex life is a challenge, and this may be in your marriage, or it may not be, particularly related to your relationship with your spouse, maybe just your own sex life in your own head, and behaviors and old wounds in that area, and it's getting you, and something needs to change. I would invite you to come to our course, yourexpectations.com, and in the Sexpectations course, you can unpack your sexual story. You can find the grace and transformation Jesus makes available. Now, Sexpectations is not a course about sex with your spouse. It's a course about dealing with your own stuff, the stuff in your own soul around sex. And I would love to invite you to come and join us, yourexpectations.com. And then, if you are wrestling in your marriage with messiness, we have a lot of resources on our Healthy Relationships page on our website. Come there and you'll find a bunch of free stuff to help address the challenges you are facing in your marriage. I just so enjoy having you as part of our podcast family. Thank you for joining me today. Love to have you subscribe so you get every episode of Relationship Prescriptions when it comes out. If you have a comment or a question, just go to the Contact Us page on our website. I would be honored to hear from you, and I respond personally. And until next time, may God bless you.
Thank you for listening to Relationship Prescriptions with Dr. Carol. Our purpose is to provide trustworthy resources that help you and others live fully alive in every way as God intended. If you would like to help others experience transformation in their lives and relationships, we invite you to partner with us. Text the word GIVE, that's GIVE, to the number 512-980-1620. Or visit our website at drcarolministries.com/donate to make a one-time contribution or monthly gift. Your financial support allows us to expand our message and to help others. Thank you so much, and may God bless you.